Good evening, welcome, and it's a kavod for us to have Rabbi Haber address us. It's a big schus for us to have him here, take out his time, and give us some energy of what we're doing supporting Torah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Baruch Hashem, I get a chance to speak often, and just so for the record, just so you know, no one's ever sitting in the front row. Okay. If I can, first of all, thank you for coming here tonight. And it's an incredible opportunity and an incredible achievement. As I'm sure you know already, it's an incredible thing for everyone in this room to be a part of. But I want to try and describe a little bit why it's worth it. Why we need this. Why we do what we do, why you do what you do. And I'd like to begin by describing, if I can, how our minds work. In order to do so, I'm going to share with you a Gemara, a story that you probably have heard from the Gemara. Everyone says it over often, Tisha B'Av time. But I think this story has a deeper meaning that maybe you've never heard before. The Gemara writes that the general that destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem ultimately punished him. And how did Hashem punish him? The general that destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash, he went to a faraway island or country, and a little fly, a yitush, went into his nose and went into his brain. And this fly apparently had something sharp, and it pecked away at his brain. And it pecked away at his brain. And he couldn't function. This fly is pecking away at his brain and pecking away at his brain. Until one day he passes a blacksmith. And while he's walking past the blacksmith, all of a sudden the blacksmith is banging with a hammer on metal. I think they call it an anvil. He's banging on the metal. And it makes noise. And the noise, for some reason, was soothing for the yitush, for this fly. And the fly stopped pecking at his brain. The general said, wow, this is so effective. He hired someone, a blacksmith, to be near him every day and just keep banging and keep making noise to settle the fly. The Gemara says it lasted for a full month. But after a month, the fly got used to the noise, and the fly no longer was impressed from the noise. And the fly went back to his pecking, and he's pecking and pecking and pecking away at this general's brain until one day the general died. And the Gemara says they opened up his brain and they saw inside of his brain this little fly had turned into a full-grown, robust bird. And it had iron claws and a metal beak. That's what the Gemara says. Now, obviously, what the Gemara means is literal. But I think there's a message in this little story that many of us can relate to. There are times in your life where a little thought, a little fly enters into your mind. And initially, it's nothing. You hear someone make a comment. You hear someone's going through something good or bad, or you hear something might happen, good or bad, and it just enters your mind. But what happens is, all of a sudden that thought starts to peck away and peck away. If I were to ask you to raise your hands, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands because frankly I can't see. The light is so blaring I can't see. I'm looking at empty chairs so far. How many women in this room are afflicted with the disease of overthinking? I can't see your hand if you raise it, but my guess is I've asked plenty of audiences before. Some men don't admit it, but most women do. And we have these little flies in our brain, and they peck away, and they peck away, and then we try to create some noise to sort of distract the fly. Some people turn on the radio, some people turn on music, some people just turn on anything. Some people even turn on me to try to distract the fly. Anything you can to sort of soothe the brain. And it works a little bit. And then it ends up not working so well. And all of a sudden the fly is back pecking and pecking away. And all of a sudden this little thought that started off as just a little nothing. You heard something's going to happen, something good, something bad, or something might happen. All of a sudden it becomes huge like a bird. And it feels like it has iron beak. And it feels like it has iron claws. It's so taking over your brain. I believe these little flies are one of the biggest challenges of our time. I'll tell you why. Because in days of old, we had a lot of physical labor. Women had a lot of physical labor. They would weave their own children's clothing. They would milk the actual cow. They would take the meat and salt it themselves. They'd wash their clothing out in the freezing cold with a little bucket of water that they brought from the well. And life had a tremendous amount of physical labor. Today we don't have so much physical labor. Your clothing is cleaned by the push of a button. Your clothing is purchased by the push of an app. Your meat just shows up delivered to your house. Expensive, but it shows up. Everything just happens, for the most part, by itself. And because of that, instead of the physical labor, we have a ton of mental labor. Thoughts are banging away, banging away. Now let me be clear. I know you have some physical work. I don't want to make sure I don't have some husband come out and say, my wife was very mad. I know it's very hard to be a mother. I know. But the mental labor is harder. So what do? At times, as life progresses, you get tired. You get worn down. You get mentally worn down. What keeps you going? So the line that the Gemara said thousands of years ago, for whatever Yetzer Hara they dealt with then, is just as true today for whatever Yetzer Hara we deal with today. Just like our rabbis were so great and as wise as they were 2,000 years ago when they told us Shabbos is coming, put down the plow. Shabbos today is still equally as relevant when they're telling us put down the phone. It's incredible that words that are so ancient could be so modern. If it's true about Shabbos and not one person would disagree, it's also true about this statement that I'm about to share with you that I hope you heard before. It's true about this statement that our rabbis say that the Hashem says, Barasi Yetzer Hara, I created a Yetzer Hara. And Barasi Torah Tavlin. And I created Torah as the response. That means whatever Yetzer Hara your generation is dealing with, the response to that Yetzer Hara is, like it always was, Torah. Can we please close that door? Babies are adorable when they stay in the hallway. Thank you. But so far, everything I told you, I think you know. But let me explain to you how it's achieved. How do you achieve the Torah that is able to be the tavlin for the challenges of our life? How do we allow Torah to soothe our brain? How does Torah become something that changes our children? So let me tell you a medrash. The medrash says that there are two paths in life. One path is very smooth. It has like green grass. It's smooth and beautiful. And then at the end of the path, there's a lot of thorns. Miles of thorns. The other path, says the Medrash, is very thorny in the beginning. Maybe 100, 200 feet of thorns. Very difficult. But after the thorns, it's beautiful and it's flat and it's miles of pasture of green and smooth. Says the Medrash, these two paths are the paths of life. And here's your choice. Either you choose the path that looks easy, and it will be easy in the beginning, but ultimately it's a mess. It's full of thorns. Or you choose the other path that's thorny in the beginning, but then eventually it's as beautiful and as smooth as can be. Almost everything in life is this way. In order to build a great business, you have to work crazy hard, and then it gets smoother. If you want to build an incredible school from scratch, the beginning is so difficult, and then it gets smoother. If anyone here is young and married, you know what I mean. If you try to build a beautiful marriage, everyone talks about Shana Rishana as being so beautiful. It is, but it's very rocky in the beginning. Understanding each other, we're different. We have different backgrounds, different families, different styles, different things we like, different things we don't like, and we're confused. But if you get through it, and you do the right thing through it, it's usually beautiful at the end. That's how a life of Torah is. It's difficult initially. It's thorny in the beginning. The alternate life, the other option, looks like it's easy. Wow, this is so much easier. It's so much easier if my husband just home every night. It's so much easier if when I wake up in the morning, he's there. It's so much easier if life is just, we do what we want. It is easier in the beginning. But in the end, it's full of thorns. But if you take the difficult road, it's difficult in the beginning. But the end is so much more beautiful. I don't know if this is the right forum to mention this example, but I'll mention the example. So, as I'm sure you know, I'm a Syrian. Should I talk like a Syrian? I'm a Syrian from the Syrian community, and the Syrian community has a lot of different types of people. And we have a lot of people that are in between from. So I think it was 3 summers ago, maybe I'm off. A bunch of people came over to me and said, Rabbi, did you hear about this thing? There's this production on the internet of a woman who describes her new life. She used to be a frum woman, grew up in Muncie, and then she chose a new life. A new life, completely different. She left her husband, left her kids. She had married new husband, a guy who became, had a big business, very wealthy, very everything. Wow. And she made this production. People could see it, they could watch it, they could see, wow, every episode. Look how great her life is now. She let go of that old archaic Torah, and now she has her new phenomenal life. And these people that were in between from said to me, Rabbi, what do you have to say? I said, I don't know, I never saw it. I said, but still, what do you have to say? I said, I'll tell you what I have to say. You want to know what I have to say? I'll tell you what I have to say. If I made a show called My Gambling Life, the first season would be phenomenal. I'd be rolling, I'd have cards, I'd have bets, I'd have 2 bets at the same time. Hotels in Atlantic City would be sending me limos to bring me to my free penthouse. I'd be betting all over the place. But by season 10, I'd be broke. Said, if you made a production called My Alcohol Life, oh, the first 3 episodes, I'd be the life of the party. I'd be standing on the table, 2 bottles of alcohol. I'd be dancing. I'd be smiling. I'd be the happiest man on the planet. But by season 10, my life would be a wreck. If you took a character who decided to make a show called My Drug Life, in the beginning, he'd be chilled. By the end, he'd be dead. It's the truth. By the way, it's everywhere. Just walked in the hallway. Some guy who's working here. Okay. I said, I'm very happy for this lady. She's having a blast right now. I said, do me a favor. Get back to me in season 10. Because I'm sure now her life is great. Because that's what the Medrash says. The beginning of the road of doing what you want is always smooth. Let's wait till she gets to the thorns. And maybe it was a little ridiculous for me to just say that, but I said it. You could go look it up. And I was involved in a modern school in the Syrian community at the time, and I even said it to a class of kids. They said, what do you have to say? And I said the same spiel. About 3 months later, the students came into the class and said, Rabbi, you don't have to wait till season 10. I said, what do you mean? Her life is a wreck. Husband, a business. She's not even making season 2. I said, it's a medrash. In fact, it's a pasuk. Re'ei anoichi noisem lefnechem hayoim bracha uklala. Hashem says, I put before you 2 paths. The path of klala always looks easy. It's always easier in the beginning. But once you take that path, whatever klala dika path you take, once you take that path, you end up a mess. But if you take the other path, the path that has thorns in the beginning, the path that has restrictions, the path that has sacrifice, the path that has a husband who's leaving at night to go learn and stay because he has to chazer it a 4th time. That path that's difficult ultimately has gorgeous pasture in the end. Ultimately, that life is incredible. Ladies, it might feel that there are times when you have to sacrifice for your husband to learn Torah. Maybe you have children that you want his help with. Maybe you have times that you just want to talk. Maybe there are times that you don't even get. Why is what he's learning helping my life? I'll tell you my little story. My in-laws were not so frum 40 years ago. Before I got married to my wife. And one night, my shver, my father-in-law, told my mother-in-law, again, this is years ago, maybe it's even 45 years ago at this point. He said, I'm going out to learn tonight. And my mother-in-law didn't know what learning was. She came from a not-from family. Okay, you're going out to learn. Her husband was going out to learn. She was so excited. He came home. And she said to him, so what'd you learn? He said, I learned about if there's an ox that goes into a chicken coop. And my mother-in-law says, like, why does it matter if an ox in a chicken coop? Like, we don't have chickens, we don't have an ox. Why does this matter? I have no idea why an ox in a chicken coop matters. I know this, that fast forward 45 years later, they have 7 children, full B'nai Torah, Rabbanim, Rabbeim. They have grandchildren, all Masmidim, dozens of them that are fully B'nai Torah, married in, and it's unbelievable. I don't know how it works, but somehow you learn a page that has black words on a white page about ox and chicken coops, and somehow your whole life changes. And you're like, 1 second, why did you come to the chasana? I want you to drive me to the chasana. I didn't come because I was learning about an ox. Like, what does that do for me? If your husband understood, he would say it does everything for you. Because the sacrifice now creates the beauty later. And you have to understand, we live in a time that there's literally this pull to just be lazy. Most of you, I'm sure, live in the tri-state area. It's been cold. Who wants to leave the house? Who wants to wake up early? You wake up 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning. even 7 in the morning. You feel like you're waking up the roosters. It's so early. But somehow it works. But the laziness is so intense. If I could just give you an example of how intense the laziness of our generation is. I was once on a plane to go make a speech in Chicago. So back then, this was like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, I didn't really care where I sat on the plane. So just so you know, if they fly you somewhere and you don't care where you sit on the plane, they put you in the worst seat in the plane. So I was in the back, in the middle of the back row. And right before the doors close of the plane, some man comes and sits down in the seat next to me. He takes up his seat and half of mine. And I'm like, well, maybe he's in his 40s, 50s. And he pulls out his phone. And for the 2-hour flight from JFK to O'Hare, the whole time, he just was crushing candy. Like this, crushing. And the whole time I'm sitting sideways because he's in my seat. And the whole time I'm just wanting to say to him, you're an adult. You're playing Candy Crush for 2 hours? So, okay. A few months ago, time I was flying to Minneapolis. So now I care where I sit. I pretty much sat with the pilot. And a frum man, yarmulke, tzitzis, out, came and sat in the seat next to me. And the entire flight, he was crushing candy. I want to say, you're a frum man. You're crushing candy the whole flight? What are you, that guy's brother? The whole flight? So a few weeks after that, I was in Panama. And I mentioned about how addictive, how lazy we could be, about the candy crushing. There was another Rav there speaking with me. 2 days later, he sends me a text. He says, I just flew to London, and the person next to me was crushing candy. What? Adults sit on a couch and crush candy? For real? Does this really happen? The answer is don't admit it, but it happens. Would you rather have a husband who sits on the couch and is scrolling through the news endlessly? Or sports like there's no end? Or would you rather have a husband that you send him out of the house and you say, go, learn whatever you learn. I don't care if I know it, I don't know it, understand it, don't understand it, relevant, irrelevant, I don't care. Go out, learn it, be kind to it, own it. And come back home and change our house, change our life, change our children, change our family. One day we'll be able to make our own program called My Beautiful Life. Because you went out into the thorns, you went out into the cold, you went out in the early mornings and the late nights, and you made Torah our life. That kid's also cute. In fact, I learned this lesson many times, but one time from a very interesting source. I had a group of women come to visit me from Toronto. They wanted some words of chizuk. It was a small group. And I mentioned to them a little bit about the two paths that you choose in your life. And one is thorny, the other one is smooth. The other one ends up smooth, the other one ends up thorny. And one of the ladies at the table said, at the end, I had times for questions. One of the ladies said, that whole thing with the two paths resonated with me very much. I said, why? She says, I'm a Giyaris. I was born and raised in Mexico. My husband, maybe his name was Carlos, I forget, also born and raised in Mexico. She says, and I became a Jew because of two galachim, two pastors. I said, what does that mean? Can you please explain this to me a little bit? She says, I'll tell you my story. She says, I was always a searcher. I kept looking for the truth. And I'd be in one church, and then I switched to another one, and then 2 years later, I switched to another one. She says, one Sunday, I'm watching a production, And it's some pastor speaking on Sundays. They do this. And in his speech, speaking about his stuff, he said 2 words randomly. He said the word Torah and the word Emunah. She said, I never heard those words before. The word Torah and Emunah. I turned off the channel. I sat in my house and started Googling Torah and Emunah. Anything that had the word Torah, I read. Any video that had the word Torah, I listened to. Anything that had anything about Emunah, I tried to learn. She says, I quit my job, and for 3 months, I just researched and researched and researched. And finally, one day, I said to my husband, I found the truth. The Jewish Mashiach, that's the truth. She says, my husband says to me, you're nuts. You're just crazy. We're Mexicans. We live in Toronto. We're on the board of our, whatever they, house of worship. What? Jewish? She says, I have all the patience in the world. Whenever you're ready, I'm ready to become a Jew. He says, okay. A few months later, he's talking to his own galach, his own pastor. And he tells this galach, he says, you realize my wife is crazy. She believes that the Old Testament is the truth and the new one is not. She says, the pastor told my husband, your wife is right. He says, what? But we're in it. Yeah, your wife is right. What do you mean my wife is right? You don't you believe in the new? He says, yeah, whatever, but she's right. She said, my husband is a very small man. He was a professor. He researched for a few years. She says, and finally on my birthday, he came over to me and said, I believe that the Jewish Mashiach is the real Mashiach. I guess that's their way of talking. And we became totally from Torah-dika Jews. Tznius, Torah, everything. I went to Toronto after that visit, and the Rav there said, these people, his husband's a Talmud Chacham today. And she says, you don't know how beautiful my life is. You don't know how I gave up nothing. She says, the only thing I miss is on my old house. I like the house. But other than that, I miss nothing from my old life. She says, for a year while I was learning, I was a goy. At goy Shabbos is us. I'm not allowed to keep Shabbos. So every Shabbos, I'd have to turn on a light. She said, you don't know how hard it was for me to turn on a light once I was starting to see the truth. Ladies, we have the greatest gift in the world. And the only reason why we sometimes don't realize it is because we drive on streets that other people are going along their freedom life, and it doesn't look like they recognize our gift. It's just because no one told them. It's just because they never got a chance to walk down our road. It's just because they never got a chance to choose our path. We have a gift, but the gift only comes with the willingness to walk down a path of sacrifice, with the willingness to experience the thorns initially. You know, there's a Gemara in Shabbos, and the Gemara, it's random where the Gemara is placed because it's in the middle of the story of Hanukkah. And in the middle of the story of Hanukkah, the Gemara says, Yosef HaTzadik was thrown into a ditch. V'habar reik ein by mayim, and the ditch was empty, it had no water. Frek the Gemara, it had no water. If it's empty, obviously it has no water. And for the Gemara responds by saying, it was empty from water. Mayim ein by. Aval nechoshim v'akravim yesh by. But snakes and scorpions were there. And then the Gemara goes right on talking about Hanukkah. And my question is, what does this have to do with Hanukkah? What's it doing here? The ditch wasn't empty. It was empty from water, but it had snakes and scorpions. Teretz is what the Gemara is telling us is that what do we celebrate on Hanukkah? We celebrate on Hanukkah on the darkest days of the year. A little bit of light pushes away so much darkness. When it starts to get dark outside, we light light. That's what we do as Jews, because light pushes away darkness. This next little Gemara that I just shared with you explains how it works, because here's how it works. Every person that's born is like a bar. They're a ditch. They're an empty hole. And here's your choice. Either you fill the ditch with mayim, and mayim el Torah, you fill the ditch with water, which is Torah. And if mayim ein bai, but if there's no water in that ditch, nechoshim v'akravim yesh bai. snakes and scorpions will come your way. It's just how it works. People say, no, I just want to have an average, simple life. In 2025, there's no such thing. It's either light or it's darkness. It's either water or snakes and scorpions. That's your choice. And in order to achieve that water, it takes sacrifice. Let me share with you a little story. This is one of my favorites. And if you've heard me before, you may have heard the story from me. But I don't apologize for saying it again, because the message is so wonderful. The Gemara said, the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos that every day a voice comes out from heaven and says, Oilehem Labria, says, sad is the people, Melbanish Torah, sad are the Jews that disregard the Torah. The Chofetz Chaim says, let me share with you a mashal to explain those words, that baskol that comes out. He says there was once a king and he was riding with his entourage and he had his stallions and horses in the front and horses with governors behind. And he stops at a spot in the road and he looks on the side of the road in the mud. There's a homeless man, tattered clothing, famished, overgrown hair. He tells the men, put him in the chariot. They say, are you serious? Put him in the chariot? He's a mess. Put him in the chariot. Yes, Your Highness. And the king and his officers go to the palace. And he tells his officers, take this man, clean him up. Give him a shower. Give him a haircut. Give him fresh clothing. Give him something to eat. The next day, the king says, give him a nice room. And give him education. Teach him culture. Teach him music. Teach him science. Teach him math. And over the next 3 years, this young man was educated until he became a refined young man. And the king decided now it's time for this man to marry my daughter. He made a gorgeous event, a gorgeous wedding with beautiful drapery, tall ceilings. Governors from all over the land came and dignitaries came all to this beautiful wedding. There was beautiful dishes and beautiful flatware, beautiful silverware, and every delicacy that was possible. They had a magnificent wedding, and then the couple went off into the sunset. 3 months later, the king is on his chariot, he's on his carriage with all of his officers in front and behind, and it's pouring rain. And he stops at a spot in the road, and he looks on the side of the road, in the puddle, in the mud, in the rain, is his son-in-law, the prince. He says, what? I gave you a chance to be a prince. I gave you a chance to live in the king's palace. I gave you a chance to be sophisticated, cultured, and educated. I let you marry my daughter. You go back to the mud. If that's your choice, then stay there. Says the Chofetz Chaim, every day a voice comes out from our Sinai and it says, Klal Yisrael, I gave you a chance to be the prince. I gave you a chance to live this beautiful life. I gave you a chance to be in the king's palace. You chose snake and scorpions instead. You chose the path that looked easy. Instead of the path was incredible. You want your life to be calm. You want your life to be smart. You want your life to be incredible. You need to sacrifice for the path that leads to so much beauty in the end. And I'm going to conclude with explaining one story to describe the level of the sacrifice. Some of you may know, about 2.5 months ago, my oldest son, learning in Lakewood Yeshiva, had a stroke. He has no feeling in his left side. He's recovering, Baruch Hashem, but it's a long process. Anyhow, at one point, he was a former Talmud of the Pisgah Yeshiva. The Manar, all the Rabbeim came to visit. The Manar of Hershel Kanarik came to visit. Rav Hershel Kanarik's father, I think his father's name was Rav Chaim Elazar Kanarik, was one of the first Talmidim of Rav Aaron Cutler. Rav Aaron Cutler, today, Lakewood Yeshiva, has, I believe, over 10,000 students. But Rav Aaron began Lakewood in White Plains with 14 students. And this Rav Kanarik, who was already Nifter, the father, Rav Hershel's father, was one of those first 14 students. I actually once saw a document of the original enrollment in Lakewood Yeshiva, and you see this young Kanarik boy on the list. Anyhow, he got married. He had one child, then he had twins, then he had another set of twins. Now, Seder in Lakewood Yeshiva back then, second Seder ended at 8:15. Now, this Reb Kanarik is married to his wife. He has 5 kids under the age of 4, and he's coming home every night at 8:15. So he goes to Reb Aaron, the Rosh Hashiva Zatzal. He goes to Reb Aaron and he says, Reb Aaron, my wife is home with all these children. Can I come home? Can I leave Second Seder a little early and come home to help her? Let me tell you Reb Aaron's response. Reb Aaron said, Nisht kan a minut, not 1 minute. You can't go home at 8:14. 8:15 it is. Now, I don't know how his wife responded, but I know how his kids turned out, because my sons are in that yeshiva. And the Rosh Hashiva is his oldest son, Rabbi Kanarik, Rabbi Hershel is the Manal. The other kid, Rabbi Kanarik, is the Mashgiach. Each one of them are tremendous Talmidei Chachamim, working together with a tremendous achdus. You might think you're sacrificing sometimes, but it's not a sacrifice. It's just an investment in everything you dream of. The fact that you have husbands that are here tonight means you have husbands that are every night or every morning or a few times. They're sacrificing for Torah. And the sacrifice on your part is difficult. It's not an easy thing to do, but it leads to everything you dream of. If you want to sit with a lazy life, with sitting on a couch with nothing to do besides playing video games, and you want the little fly in your head pecking away at your brain, tell your husband, stay home and let's do nothing. But instead, if you tell him to go on that difficult path and willing to go through the thorns, we're going to sacrifice now for everything we're going to gain out of this later. We're going to have this most beautiful and incredible life. We're going to fill our bar with mayim. We're going to fill our life with Torah, because there are 2 paths and we're choosing the right one. Even though it's difficult, somehow chickens and cows and chicken coops somehow changes everything in our future. So now, ladies, you're going to have an opportunity for a few minutes to watch your husbands in action and watch why your sacrifice is worth it and why the life you're living is the life you dream of. Because one day you're going to sit with all your grandchildren and you're going to tell them the story of our beautiful life. Thank you.